Joining me now from Dunedin is Otago University International Relations expert Robert Patman. Hi there, Robert.
Good morning, Michael.
Now, this is there's a lot at stake here, isn't it? It's not just the local protests and the local government. It's also a bit of a Western countries versus Russia battle, isn't it? How's that developing, that battle between the two blocs?
Yes, it's a bit like a modern version of what historians used to call the Great Game. There's great power rivalry around the Ukraine, and in a sense, it's symptomatic of Mr. Putin's attempt to reassert Moscow as a great player in Central Europe, and part of that effort is to entwine the Ukraine in a Russian-led Euro-Asian customs union. Ukraine, being a country of 46 million, would be the centrepiece of that. But unfortunately for the Russians, they've just suffered a major diplomatic setback with their ally, Mr. Yanukovych, apparently swept away after the Russian parliament voted no confidence in him. And he's fled to the eastern part of the country, which is predominantly populated by Russian-speaking people.
Were you surprised that he did flee like that?
I was a bit. The security authorities under Mr. Yanukovych's control were being quite ruthless in dealing with the protests, but the protests, of course, showed no signs of going away. And there may be it's that the security forces around Mr. Yanukovych apparently indicated they would no longer guard him. But the parliamentary vote of no confidence was also decisive. Whatever the reasons, Mr. Yanukovych has gone, but he has not relinquished power as president, and he describes the situation as a coup, which makes one a little bit fearful, Michael, that we may be seeing Ukraine on the brink of civil war. And
what about the Russian response so far?
Well, the Russians have a very deep interest in Ukraine. They do see it as central, and Mr. Putin sees it as a central piece of Russia's attempt to reassert itself on the international stage. And they're particularly worried about the EU's attempts to bring the Ukraine within its orbit through a trade association agreement. And they're also very sensitive about the American support for the opposition in Ukraine to Mr. Yanukovych. So we have here the makings of a potentially explosive international situation, particularly if there's civil war. That could be the sign for the Russians to move in. They've made it quite clear they have their Black Sea naval fleet at the Crimea, and they've made it quite clear they will do what's necessary to protect that, including military force.
What about Tymoshenko now? She's been released. What's her role going to be?
Well, she got Mrs. Yulia Tymoshenko got a mixed reception after her release. I think some Ukrainians welcome her back, but she's also seen as a little bit of a divisive figure. We'll have to wait and see. The rumour at the moment is that she's looking for the top job, the presidency. She has worked with the Russians in the past, so that may not be such a big deal, but we'll just have to wait and see. The political situation in Ukraine is clearly in flux, and we can't rule out other political figures coming to the stage in what is a very fluid situation.
And the Americans have already come out warning against Russian intervention, haven't they?
They have. Mr. Putin is actually under pressure because he's spoken, you know, he's talked quite firmly about Russian interests in the Ukraine. Remember, the Ukraine used to be part of the Soviet Union. There are historical links between the Ukraine and Russia. And so this is a situation Mr. Putin may feel he has to act in order to maintain his domestic credibility in Moscow. So he's under a little bit of domestic pressure himself. I think this situation could be potentially explosive in the next few days.
OK, thanks. We'll be watching that very closely. Thank you very much there, Robert Patman there from Otago University.